Welcome to the update on the forthcoming Segment 3 project. I am Samantha Danchuk. I am the Assistant Director of the Environmental Planning and Community Resilience Division, and I am joined today by Greg Ward, our Deputy Beach Manager, and Stephanie Kedzeth, our Sea Turtle Program Manager. She will be monitoring the chat for us. And next slide, please. Throughout our presentation today, we welcome your questions. Please just type them in the chat and we will be sure to get to them in the discussion time that we have saved for the end of the presentation. And I'll make sure that we get through all the questions. Also, you can always email us anytime at resilience@broward.org or visit our website, broward.org/beach-renourishment. There's already updates about the Segment 2 and Segment 3 and sand bypass projects online, and we'll always regular post updates on the website. Also, you can follow us on social media at Broward END and on Facebook, Broward Environment. We will be posting weekly and regular updates throughout construction to make sure that you have the latest information about where the work areas are and when the project is starting. You can always call us 954-519-1270 for any questions about the beach, and especially during construction if you see something you have a question about. And if you need immediate response from the county, you can call 311 as well for any type of concern you have. We will be regularly updating our municipal staff and providing them the latest updates about construction and when they'll be doing different pieces of the work and where they'll be working from week to week. So you can always outreach to your municipal city staff and town staff as well anytime. So this afternoon, we are going to kick off the presentation with a kind of a history and explanation of the priorities of the beach management program. And Greg, will you go ahead and start us with that presentation?
Sure will. Thank you, Sam. So, we're presenting this in the interest of anybody who might not be familiar with the beach management program or these projects in the past. And I'm going to go through a brief history of why we're here. So because the beaches are so important to the county, both environmentally and economically, it's our goal to maintain healthy, pristine, and wide beaches for tourists, residents, marine life altogether. Maintaining our beaches is vital because they're such a huge economic driver, producing indirect and direct benefits of $8.5 million throughout the county. They protect about $4 billion in upland infrastructure, and they're also critical habitat to nesting sea turtles and other marine life. And so many of the beach management issues, at least pertaining to Segment 3, began with the opening and deepening of Port Everglades in the late 1920s. And one of the issues affecting the whole of South Florida to some extent is that offshore waves from the Atlantic tend to wrap around the Bahamas banks and approach us from the north, which means that the littoral sand transport within the nearshore surface zone, tends to lean in a southerly direction about 80% of the time. And so with the deepening of the port channel in the late 20s, that net southerly movement was effectively blocked at the Port Everglades Inlet, impacting southern county sediment budgets. And so to stop the resultant beach retreat and erosion, groins and hard armoring were the most prevalently used. And for the most part, they weren't effective. They may have stabilized a small part of the beach, but due to the limited amount of sediment within the coastal system, they typically aided in accelerating erosion rates. At one point in time, it was estimated that there were more than 230 groins distributed along the county's coast, and because of the need for expensive repair and rehabilitation, a majority of the structures ended up neglected, defunct, and simply hazardous, getting buried over time. And so recognizing the need for a coordinated effort to combat beach erosion, the Broward County Shore Protection Project, aka the federal project, was authorized under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1965. And the act created the framework that allowed the federal government to enter into agreement for cost sharing and federal reimbursement for planning, design, and construction costs, among other things, for county beach renourishment projects. Because of the high erosion rates on many beaches in Segment 3, there have been quite a few federal beach shore protection projects for this segment. The last, however, was in 2005-06, and since that time there's been a local initiative project in Hollywood, a federal navigation channel operations and maintenance dredging, and a flood control and coastal emergencies project by the federal government in 2019. And so the 2019 project, the FCC project, some of you might remember, that project, like the project we'll be discussing today, was conducted under the authority of the Flood Control and Coastal Emergencies Act. And like it, the one we're discussing today will also be implemented under that same FCCE response, that being in response to Hurricane Irma. It'll be similar in length to the 2019 FCCE project, seeking to replace sand where needed in the template permitted for the 2005-06 project. However, the distinction between these projects, the 2019 FCCE response and the currently planned response, and the reason they're being conducted at different times under the same authorization, FCCE authorization, was one dictated by necessity in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma, and that being in order to provide immediate relief to eroded beaches and at-peril communities. The 2019 project was implemented as above mean high water. And what this means is that the sand placement was limited to the dry beach above the mean high water line. At the time, it was deemed the most expedient way to get sand on the beach as quickly as possible and avoid potential delays if a full permitted design template was used. And so here we are, 2020, seeking to cooperatively facilitate the intent of the FCC authorization in response to Hurricane Irma, but with a more robust and full template response. The length of beach covered under this project will be nearly 6 miles, similar to the 2019 project, which is highlighted in red here. However, it's intended to provide the full measure of shoreline protection by renourishing where needed the full design template used under the 2005-06 project. And so the volume of sand restored to the segment 3 beaches under this project is expected to require somewhere around 1 million cubic yards, in contrast to, for example, the 2019 project, which was above mean high water and was approximately 135,000 cubic yards. And so just for reference, this is what the full template looks like in the state park, post-construction at the state park. And then this is what it looks like down in the Hollywood area. And so you'll see the September 2005 immediately post-construction, and then April 2006 is more of a equilibrium profile. The beach is intended to settle to some extent, and it'll be a little bit wider at the berm than when initially constructed. And so just as an example of how the volume differences going to affect, the 2019 above mean high water project is represented for the park on the left, and then the full template as built in 2013 is on the right. And it varies by sectional needs and site conditions, but the full design profile typically add greater than 50 feet of width to any given area of the beach. So I'll go back to Sam, and she can tell you about how this project is going to be implemented and costs and all that good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. So as Greg just described, this project is being constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers rather than the county or an individual city. And it's specifically to replace the sand lost from Hurricane Irma. And so this is actually a real benefit to our region because it's going to be built at 100% federal funding. And this project is estimated to cost nearly $58.5 million. In order to place the 1 million cubic yards of sand, as described, along the 6 miles of beach, including the state parks through Dania Beach, Hollywood, and Hallandale Beach. And so construction is estimated to begin most likely November 2021 through March 2022, but there is a possibility that sand could be placed in the state park as early as March 2021. Next slide. So the goal is absolutely to replace the losses from Hurricane Irma. Throughout the project, we want to make sure that disruption is limited, is limited as much as possible, and that beach use is not impacted, and make sure that the traffic patterns are not affecting the local neighborhoods. Absolutely want to make sure that any environmental impacts are avoided, and that overall this project is adding storm protection from surge, from waves and erosion, and over the long term from sea level rise. It's really, really important that we maintain the beaches. One feature that I'll discuss a little bit more later is the state park will be receiving a dune feature in order to increase the resilience of the state park. As you know, there's severe erosion there, and sand loss there is pretty rapid. Some of that is going to change because of the sand bypass project, which I'll talk about at the end of today's presentation. But I will also mention that the county would like to help municipalities construct the dune along the rest of segment 3. And so that would be a very new feature to have a continuous dune or near continuous dune throughout Hollywood and Hallandale, but it would really bring the recommended resilience for the beach region. Next slide. So the sand itself is coming from upland sand mines in the center of Florida. It is trucked through approved routes to come to Broward County. All of the sand mines have been pre-approved by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. The sand must meet very specific and strict guidelines related to sand grain size, the color, and the silt content, the fine material that's in the sand, and any shell and whatnot, in order to make sure it's exactly the same as possible as the sand that's on the beach already. And the sand that has been brought to the beach in segment 3 was previously brought from truck haul. So it really should match the sand that was put on the last project. There will be local traffic plans that are developed by the contractor. A contract has not been awarded yet, but once that contractor is on board, traffic plans will be developed to ensure that the access points are safely used, and that they're preparing to make sure there's any site restoration that needs to be done, and to make sure that there's as little disruption as possible to the local traffic, because there will be a large number of trucks coming to deliver the sand to the beach. Next slide. So just to emphasize that the sand will look like you would expect, as it has from previous projects, and match what's on the beach today. Sand does lighten over time, so as the sun bakes the sand, you will see it turn lighter and lighter in color over time. But it will match the grain size, the similar color, and it should look exactly like the sand that is put on from previous projects. Next slide. So describe the staging and access areas. So this is an essential piece of the construction project. Essentially, trucks will be delivering the sand to the street ends of the beach, where it will then either be offloaded and then moved by heavy equipment up and down the beach, or it could be transported via conveyor belt to get it to the beach, or it could be transported to other beach driving trucks that will then run the sand up and down the beach as needed to the place where they're building out the beach. So the contractor is going to design the project to be as efficient as possible to try to minimize community impact, use the access points for the least amount of time needed in order to get the sand to the place that it needs to be. They will put fences around the areas that need to be secure to make sure that everyone is kept safe. But you will see the equipment that's in these pictures at the access points, and then staged on the beach, the heavy equipment that's needed to move around sand. Next slide. So specifically for segment 3, the staging and access points are listed here. So in Dania Beach, it's at the Dania Pier parking lot at the end of Cambridge Street. In Hollywood, the access points are Balboa, Mead, Greenbrier, and at Keating Park. And in Hallandale, it's South City Beach Park. And so I will emphasize that these are the options that have been provided by the municipalities. The contractor will decide if all of these need to be used or if only some of them need to be used based on where they need to place the sand. And so we will have those final details. We plan to come back and do another public webinar in February in order to give you those more kind of detailed description of how many trucks per day, at what staging point, during what week, and for how long. But in general, you will see these trucks operating at the staging points, sunrise to sunset, and for as many trucks as needed to get the sand on the beach. Next slide, please. So again, just to describe, there will be traffic lanes on the beach for the trucks that are moving the sand from the street end to the place that it needs to be placed. There will be guards essentially monitoring the traffic on the beach to make sure that keep people safe as they're walking in the area. I will emphasize that if you see a fenced area or you see a sign, it's really important to read the sign, to ask before you start to walk into an active construction zone, because even though the trucks are loud and they have horns, and they have horns when they're backing up, it is extremely hard for truck drivers to see someone walking or laying on the beach. And so we want to keep everyone as safe as possible. And so we really, really advise that you do not go into the active work areas. And they will be marked and they will move from day to day and week to week. And we will try and give you that information ahead of time. But really always please be very vigilant to make sure that you don't enter an active work zone. Next slide, please. So these construction zones can be as large as 1,000 feet. Public access will be restricted so that people can't get in front of the equipment, and it will move. So a segment will be completed, then they'll move to the next construction zone. And so they'll move and complete different segments as they move up or down the beach. Next slide. To explain where sand will be placed, many property owners have provided us with perpetual storm damage reduction easements, allowing sand to be placed kind of in a continuous line and at some points on part of their property, if they provided this easement, in order to have kind of a continuous berm design along the beach. If an easement was not provided by the property owner, then sand will either not be placed in front of their property, or it will be placed seaward of the erosion control line, which is a line that has been established by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and there are maps available for that line online. This is important in that I just want to emphasize that if you have not provided an easement, no sand will be placed in front or on your property, and so only if you've provided an easement will there be any sand placed, kind of to make sure that the line along the dune and the berm is connected, only if you provided the easement. Okay, next slide, please. So throughout construction, there will be monitoring of vibration at the street end to ensure there's no structural damage from the trucks moving back and forth and onto and off the beach. Also, as sand is pushed into the water, as there's some parts of segment 3 where sand will actually be placed underwater, monitoring of the turbidity. So that's when fine material kind of gets dispersed in the water column and you can see a colored kind of gray plume, that would be considered high turbidity. And sampling occurs throughout the project to make sure that we don't get to a condition where there's high turbidity that might actually damage the reef. And so that monitoring is throughout the project, and it could cause the project to come to a halt if there was really high turbidity. Next slide, please. Also, throughout the project and after the project, there is environmental monitoring to make sure that the sand placement does not have an impact to any of the nearshore resources, the hard bottom or the coral. And also throughout the project, there's monitoring of the listed species and endangered species like sea turtles to make sure that there's no harm to those species, and also seabirds. So seabirds nest in February, so we make sure that there's no impact to the nesting area while construction of the project occurs. Next slide, please. We thought this was a great opportunity, since we were speaking to the right people, just to highlight that there are sea turtle lighting ordinances in effect throughout the county. Effective March 1st through October 1st, during sea turtle nesting season, lights are required to be shielded and pointed downward so that there's not kind of a direct visible light from the beach. They need to be the right color, so warm colors with long wavelengths, amber or red colors, and with the right lumen output. And then also we just want to remind you that, you may have a kitchen light on or a hall light on, and that can be visible from the beach. So it's really important to draw your shade during nesting season. And since you are the stakeholders that can have the most impact on the sea turtles, we just wanted to have that friendly reminder. Thank you. Next slide. So this next feature is really exciting for segment 3. So in segment 2, which is the beach north from Port Everglades, north to the Hillsborough Inlet, where there's the shore protection project, and during the last federal project, a dune feature was added. And this dune provided great resilience to the surge events that happened, from the hurricanes that we faced and from the regular tropical storms that we faced. And what it does is basically prevent the waves from accessing either the street or the road. It prevents property damage because there's excess sand available in the berm, and so it can kind of release that sand as the high waves are acting on the beach. It's it's been validated as a critical resilience feature for every coastline, and this project is offering us an opportunity to add a dune in segment 3. At the moment, there's only agreement in process to add the dune to the state park. County staff will be reaching out to the municipalities to coordinate on where a dune could be added in Hollywood and Hallandale and Dania Beach to try to increase the resilience of the beach. And some of those cities have an actual dune placement, a plan that they've been putting together. So we would absolutely align with that plan. But it's a really important resilience initiative. This is a great opportunity to do this project since so much of the cost of this project is 100% is being borne by the federal government. It leaves an opportunity for the county and the municipalities to fund this additional resilience feature at a time when they don't have to pay for the rest of the larger project. Next slide, please. So the segment 3 project schedule, the contract is anticipated to be awarded by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in February of 2021. This leaves an opportunity for the contractor to place sand in the state park in March and possibly April of 2021. And then construction for the majority of segment 3 will begin in November of 2021 and continue through April of 2022. If the entire project is not finished, the contractor would need to come back in November of 2022. All of this is dependent upon when the contractor award is awarded. Next slide, please. I'd like to quickly give you an overview of the sand bypass project because there is such a great benefit to the segment 3 area, and the schedule is aligning with the segment 3 project. So next slide, please. As you know, this sand bypass project has been 20 plus years in the making. It is an incredible resilience project for the region. Today, you may notice that north of the Port Everglades Inlet, the beach is quite wide and it's held by the jetty. And essentially, the beach is so wide there, no sand is getting past the beach and the jetty across the inlet to the state park. There's no natural transport as there normally would be if there was not an inlet there. And so there's a need for mechanical transport to move sand that's collecting at the north of the inlet and move it to the south of the inlet in the state park. And so that's what this project is proposed to do. Next slide, please. There will be a very large hole or a sand trap constructed and dredged covering about 11 acres right out front of the Point of America's building and north of the North Jetty in Port Everglades. It'll be about 29 to 50 feet deep, and it will dredge about 365,000 cubic yards of material to build it the first time. Every 2 to 4 years, the sand trap will fill up, and then there'll be an opportunity to dredge that clean sand and move it to the state park again. From the state park, the sand will naturally slowly move to the rest of segment 3 and offset as much as 40 to 50% of the erosion that typically occurs in segment 3. And that is a great reduction in project costs. It is an avoidance of the severe erosion that we've been seeing in segment 3, particularly after hurricanes, and it builds a much more stable beach management system. Also, as part of the project, the jetty on the north side will be tightened so that less sand moves into the navigational channel and is lost. There will be rubble removal of about 7-acre area, which was actually an area where there was some rubble placed as part of the original construction of the jetty. So now that will be cleared, and it provides an opportunity for the hard bottom that's there to actually recruit new coral and build back the ecosystem that used to be there. And also there will be 2 mitigation reefs that will be built as part of this project, totaling about 0.5 acres. Next slide, please. So the schedule for this sand bypass project, the contractor, we're in procurement now. We hope to award a contract to a contractor to construct the project by April of 2021. And then they could begin dredging as early as May and work through the summer and into the fall through November. And at the same time, be completing the jetty improvements and the other elements of the project. And then also constructing the mitigation reef. So that, as you can see, that project does align with the Segment 3 project, construction of the Segment 3 project. So next slide, please. So this just shows you a better visual of the sand trap itself offshore of the North Jetty. When the sand trap is built, a lot of rock and some sand will be removed. If that sand is clean and beach compatible, it will be placed on the north side of the North Jetty to fill in a dip in elevation that's there, and then that beach will be stable long term. And all of the future sand from the sand trap will be placed at the state park to the south of the inlet. Next slide, please. This visual shows the tightening of the North Jetty and just highlights the other pieces of the project. As I described, there will also be a rubble barrier built to kind of assist with keeping sand within the sand trap. Next slide. So over the course of 2021, you may see equipment like is shown in these photos. Obviously offshore, there'll be dredging and excavation that occurs. Near the jetty, you'll see barges with cranes and other heavy equipment, excavators, moving the rock and putting in the sheet pile to tighten the jetty. And then wherever the beach compatible sand is placed, you will see heavy equipment on the beach. Sand will be piped from the dredge onshore and then moved around by heavy equipment in order to build the beach in the shape that's desired. Next slide, please. So just to highlight for you that these two project schedules do overlap. So in February of 2021, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be awarding the contract for the Segment 3 project. Segment 3 project could begin placing sand in the state park in March of 2021. Then in April, the sand bypass contract will hopefully be awarded to a contractor. And then the sand bypass dredging and jetty improvements could begin as early as May of 2021. The majority of Segment 3 will be built after November of 2021. And then the first bypass event could occur as soon as 2024. And remember, there's a little bit of wiggle room in that year because it's expected to fill the sand trap every 2 to 4 years. So the sand trap will be monitored to make sure that it's completely full before the dredging occurs. And so with that, I'll just remind you, next slide, please, that please enter any questions you have in the chat window. We are going to ask you to unmute yourselves and ask any questions live to us now. You can always email us at resilience@broward.org with any questions you have throughout the project. We'll post regular updates online and on social media. You can call us anytime. You can always call 311 if you see anything on the beach that you want to report. And we will be sure to make sure we're in close communication with your municipalities to make sure they have the latest project information as well. We anticipate coming back to you with another public webinar in February because, as I noted, some of this schedule is dependent upon procurement, and so we'll be able to give you more up-to-date information in February about when projects will start and where contractors will be working when.